Book 8, Part 2. As when a ship by skilful steersmen wrought nigh river's mouth or foreland, where the wind veers oft, as oft so steers, and shifts her sail, so varied he, and of his tortuous train curled many a wanton wreath in sight of Eve, to lure her eye. She busied, heard the sound of rustling leaves, but minded not, as used to such disport before her through the field, from every beast, more duteous at her call than at Circean call the herd disguised. He bolder now, uncalled before her stood, but as in gaze admiring. Oft he bowed his turret crest, and sleek enamelled neck fawning, and licked the ground whereon she trod. His gentle dumb expression turned at length the eye of Eve to mark his play. He, glad of her attention gained, with serpent tongue organic or impulse of vocal air, his fraudulent temptation thus began. Wonder not, sovereign mistress, if perhaps thou canst, who art sole wonder, much less arm thy looks, the heaven of mildness, with disdain, displeased that I approach thee thus, and gaze insatiate, I thus single, nor have feared thy awful brow, more awful thus retired. Fairest resemblance of thy Maker fair, thee all things living gaze on, all things thine by gift, and thy celestial beauty adore with ravishment beheld, their best beheld where universally admired. But here, in this enclosure wild, these beasts among, beholders rude, and shallow to discern half what in thee is fair, one man except, who sees thee, and what is one, who shouldst be seen a goddess among gods, adored and served by angels numberless, thy daily train. So glozed the tempter, and his proem tuned. Into the heart of Eve his words made way, though at the voice much marvelling. At length, not unamazed, she thus in answer spake: What may this mean? Language of man pronounced by tongue of brute, and human sense expressed? The first at least of these I thought denied to beasts, whom God on their creation day created mute to all articulate sound. The latter I demur, for in their looks much reason, and in their actions oft appears. Thee, serpent, subtlest beast of all the field, I knew, but not with human voice endued. Redouble then this miracle, and say, how camest thou speakable of mute, and how to me so friendly grown above the rest of brutal kind, that daily are in sight? Say, for such wonder claims attention due. To whom the guileful tempter thus replied: Empress of this fair world, resplendent Eve, easy to me it is to tell thee all what thou commandst, and right thou shouldst be obeyed. I was at first as other beasts that graze the trodden herb, of abject thoughts and low, as was my food, nor aught but food discerned or sex, and apprehended nothing high, till on a day, roving the field, I chanced a goodly tree far distant to behold, loaden with fruit of fairest colours mixed, ruddy and gold. I nearer drew to gaze, when from the boughs a savoury odour blown, grateful to appetite, more pleased my sense than smell of sweetest fennel, or the teats of ewe or goat dropping with milk at even, unsucked of lamb or kid, that tend their play. To satisfy the sharp desire I had of tasting those fair apples, I resolved not to defer. Hunger and thirst at once, powerful persuaders, quickened at the scent of that alluring fruit, urged me so keen. About the mossy trunk I wound me soon, for high from ground the branches would require thy utmost reach, or Adam's. Round the tree all other beasts that saw, with like desire longing and envying stood, but could not reach. Amid the tree now got, where plenty hung tempting so nigh, to pluck and eat my fill I spared not, for such pleasure till that hour at feed or fountain never had I found. Sated at length, ere long I might perceive strange alteration in me, to degree of reason in my inward powers, and speech wanted not long, though to this shape retained. Thenceforth to speculations high or deep I turned my thoughts, and with capacious mind considered all things visible in heaven, or earth, or middle, all things fair and good. But all that fair and good in thy divine semblance, and in thy beauty's heavenly ray united I beheld. No fair to thine equivalent or second, which compelled me thus, though importune perhaps, to come and gaze, and worship thee of right declared sovereign of creatures, universal dame. So talked the spirited sly snake, and Eve, yet more amazed, unwary, thus replied: Serpent, thy overpraising leaves in doubt the virtue of that fruit, in thee first proved. But say, where grows the tree? From hence how far? For many are the trees of God that grow in paradise, and various yet unknown to us. In such abundance lies our choice, as leaves a greater store of fruit untouched, still hanging incorruptible, till men grow up to their provision, and more hands help to disburden nature of her birth. To whom the wily adder, blithe and glad: Empress, the way is ready, and not long. Behold a row of myrtles on a flat, fast by a fountain, one small thicket past of blowing myrrh and balm. If thou accept my conduct, I can bring thee thither soon. Lead then, said Eve. He leading, swiftly rolled in tangles, and made intricate seem straight to mischief swift. Hope elevates, and joy brightens his crest, as when a wandering fire, compact of unctuous vapor, which the night condenses and the cold environs round, kindled through agitation to a flame, which oft, they say, some evil spirit attends hovering and blazing with delusive light, misleads the amazed night wanderer from his way to bogs and mires, and oft through pond or pool, there swallowed up and lost, from succor far. So glistered the dire snake, and into fraud led Eve, our credulous mother, to the tree of prohibition, root of all our woe, which when she saw, thus to her guide she spake: Serpent, we might have spared our coming hither, fruitless to me, though fruit be here to excess, the credit of whose virtue rest with thee, wondrous indeed, if cause of such effects. But of this tree we may not taste nor touch. God so commanded, and left that command sole daughter of his voice. The rest we live law to ourselves, our reason is our law. To whom the tempter guilefully replied: Indeed? Hath God then said that of the fruit of all these garden trees ye shall not eat, yet lords declared of all in earth or air? To whom thus Eve, yet sinless: Of the fruit of each tree in the garden we may eat, but of the fruit of this fair tree amidst the garden God hath said, Ye shall not eat thereof, nor shall ye touch it, lest ye die. She scarce had said, though brief, when now more bold the tempter, but with show of zeal and love to man, and indignation at his wrong, new part puts on, and as to passion moved, fluctuates disturbed, yet comely and in act raised, as of some great matter to begin. As when of old some orator renowned in Athens or free Rome, where eloquence flourished, since mute, to some great cause addressed, stood in himself collected, while each part, motion, each act won audience ere the tongue, sometimes in height began, as no delay of preface brooking through his zeal of right, so standing, moving, or to height upgrown, the tempter all impassioned thus began: O sacred, wise, and wisdom-giving plant, mother of science, now I feel thy power within me clear, not only to discern things in their causes, but to trace the ways of highest agents, deemed however wise. Queen of this universe, do not believe those rigid threats of death. Ye shall not die. How should ye? By the fruit? It gives you life to knowledge. By the threatener, look on me, me who have touched and tasted, yet both live, and life more perfect have attained than fate meant me, by venturing higher than my lot. Shall that be shut to man which to the beast is open? Or will God incense his ire for such a petty trespass, and not praise rather your dauntless virtue, whom the pain of death denounced, whatever thing death be, deterred not from achieving what might lead to happier life, knowledge of good and evil? Of good, how just? Of evil, if what is evil be real, why not known, since easier shunned? God therefore cannot hurt ye and be just. Not just, not God. Not feared then, nor obeyed. Your fear itself of death removes the fear. Why then was this forbid? Why but to awe? Why but to keep ye low and ignorant, his worshippers? He knows that in the day ye eat thereof, your eyes that seem so clear, yet are but dim, shall perfectly be then opened and cleared, and ye shall be as gods, knowing both good and evil as they know. That ye should be as gods, since I as man, internal man, is but proportion meet, I of brute human, ye of human gods. So ye shall die perhaps by putting off human to put on gods, death to be wished, though threatened, which no worse than this can bring. And what are gods that man may not become as they, participating godlike food? The gods are first, and that advantage use on our belief, that all from them proceeds. I question it. For this fair earth I see, warmed by the sun, producing every kind, them nothing. If they all things, who enclosed knowledge of good and evil in this tree, that whoso eats thereof forthwith attains wisdom without their leave? And wherein lies the offense, that man should thus attain to know? What can your knowledge hurt him, or this tree impart against his will, if all be his? Or is it envy? And can envy dwell in heavenly breasts? These and many more causes import your need of this fair fruit. Goddess humane, reach then, and freely taste. He ended, and his words replete with guile into her heart too easy entrance won. Fixed on the fruit she gazed, which to behold might tempt alone, and in her ears the sound yet rung of his persuasive words, impregned with reason to her seeming, and with truth. Meanwhile the hour of noon drew on, and waked an eager appetite, raised by the smell so savory of that fruit, which with desire inclinable now grown to touch or taste, solicited her longing eye. Yet first pausing awhile, thus to herself she mused, Great are thy virtues, doubtless, best of fruits, though kept from man, and worthy to be admired, whose taste, too long forborne, at first essay gave elocution to the mute, and taught the tongue not made for speech to speak thy praise. Thy praise he also who forbids thy use, conceals not from us, naming thee the tree of knowledge, knowledge both of good and evil. Forbids us then to taste, but his forbidding commends thee more, while it infers the good by thee communicated, and our want. For good unknown sure is not had, or had and yet unknown is as not had at all. In plain then, what forbids he but to know, forbids us good, forbids us to be wise? Such prohibitions bind not. But if death bind us with after bands, what profits then our inward freedom? In the day we eat of this fair fruit, our doom is, we shall die. How dies the serpent? He hath eaten and lives, and knows, and speaks, and reasons, and discerns, irrational till then. For us alone was death invented, or to us denied this intellectual food for beasts reserved? For beasts it seems, yet that one beast which first hath tasted envies not, but brings with joy the good befallen him, author unsuspect, friendly to man, far from deceit or guile. What fear I then? Rather what know to fear under this ignorance of good and evil, of God or death, of law or penalty? Here grows the cure of all, this fruit divine, fair to the eye, inviting to the taste, of virtue to make wise. What hinders then to reach and feed at once both body and mind? So saying, her rash hand in evil hour forth reaching to the fruit she plucked, she ate. Earth felt the wound, and nature from her seat sighing through all her works gave signs of woe, that all was lost. Back to the thicket slunk the guilty serpent, and well might, for Eve, intent now wholly on her taste, naught else regarded, such delight till then as seemed in fruit she never tasted, whether true or fancied so, through expectation high of knowledge, nor was Godhead from her thought. Greedily she engorged without restraint, and knew not eating death. Satiate at length, and heightened as with wine, jocund and boon, thus to herself she pleasingly began. O sovereign, virtuous, precious of all trees in paradise, of operation blessed to sapience, hitherto obscured, infamed, and thy fair fruit let hang, as to no end created. But henceforth my early care, not without song, each morning and due praise shall tend thee, and the fertile burden ease of thy full branches offered free to all, till dieted by thee I grow mature in knowledge, as the gods who all things know, though others envy what they cannot give, for had the gift been theirs, it had not here thus grown. Experience next to thee I owe, best guide. Not following thee I had remained in ignorance. Thou openst wisdom's way, and givest access, though secret she retire. And I perhaps am secret. Heaven is high, high and remote to see from thence distinct each thing on earth, and other care perhaps may have diverted from continual watch our great forbidder, safe with all his spies about him. But to Adam in what sort shall I appear? Shall I to him make known as yet my change, and give him to partake full happiness with me? Or rather not, but keep the odds of knowledge in my power without co-partner, so to add what wants in female sex, the more to draw his love, and render me more equal, and perhaps a thing not undesirable, sometime superior. For inferior who is free? This may be well, but what if God have seen, and death ensue? Then I shall be no more, and Adam wedded to another Eve shall live with her enjoying, I extinct, a death to think. Confirmed then I resolve, Adam shall share with me in bliss or woe, so dear I love him, that with him all deaths I could endure, without him live no life. So saying, from the tree her steps she turned, but first low reverence done, as to the power that dwelt within, whose presence had infused into the plant sciential sap, derived from nectar, drink of gods. Adam, the while, waiting desirous her return, had wove of choicest flowers a garland to adorn her tresses, and her rural labours crown, as reapers oft are wont their harvest queen. Great joy he promised to his thoughts, and new solace in her return so long delayed. Yet oft his heart, divine of something ill, misgave him. He the faltering measure felt, and forth to meet her went, the way she took that morn when first they parted. By the tree of knowledge he must pass. There he her met, scarce from the tree returning, in her hand a bough of fairest fruit that downy smiled, new gathered, and ambrosial smell diffused. To him she hasted, in her face excuse came prologue, and apology to prompt, which with bland words at will she thus addressed. Hast thou not wondered, Adam, at my stay? Thee I have missed, and thought it long deprived thy presence, agony of love till now not felt, nor shall be twice, for never more mean I to try what rash untried I sought, the pain of absence from thy sight. But strange hath been the cause, and wonderful to hear. This tree is not, as we are told, a tree of danger tasted, nor to evil unknown opening the way, but of divine effect to open eyes, and make them gods who taste, and hath been tasted such. The serpent, wise or not restrained as we, or not obeying, hath eaten of the fruit, and is become not dead, as we are threatened, but thenceforth endued with human voice and human sense, reasoning to admiration, and with me persuasively hath so prevailed, that I have also tasted, and have also found the effects to correspond. Opener mine eyes, dim erst, dilated spirits, ampler heart, and growing up to Godhead, which for thee chiefly I sought, without thee can despise. For bliss, as thou hast part, to me is bliss, tedious unshared with thee, and odious soon. Thou therefore also taste, that equal lot may join us, equal joy as equal love, lest thou not tasting different degree disjoin us, and I then too late renounce deity for thee, when fate will not permit. Thus Eve with countenance blithe her story told, but in her cheek distemper flushing glowed. On the other side Adam, soon as he heard the fatal trespass done by Eve, amazed, astonied stood and blank, while horror chill ran through his veins, and all his joints relaxed. From his slack hand the garland wreathed for Eve down dropped, and all the faded roses shed. Speechless he stood and pale, till thus at length first to himself he inward silence broke. O fairest of creation, last and best of all God's works, creature in whom excelled whatever can to sight or thought be formed, holy, divine, good, amiable, or sweet, how art thou lost, how on a sudden lost, defaced, deflowered, and now to death devote! Rather, how hast thou yielded to transgress the strict forbiddance, how to violate the sacred fruit forbidden? Some cursed fraud of enemy hath beguiled thee, yet unknown, and me with thee hath ruined. For with thee certain my resolution is to die. How can I live without thee? How forego thy sweet converse, and love so dearly joined, to live again in these wild woods forlorn? Should God create another Eve, and I another rib afford, yet loss of thee would never from my heart. No, no, I feel the link of nature draw me, flesh of flesh, bone of my bone thou art, and from thy state mine never shall be parted, bliss or woe. So having said, as one from sad dismay recomforted, and after thoughts disturbed submitting to what seemed remedialess, thus in calm mood his words to Eve he turned. Bold deed thou hast presumed, adventurous Eve, and peril great provoked. Who thus hath dared, had it been only coveting to eye that sacred fruit, sacred to abstinence, much more to taste it, under ban to touch? But past who can recall, or done undo? Not God omnipotent, nor fate. Yet so perhaps thou shalt not die. Perhaps the fact is not so heinous now, foretasted fruit, profaned first by the serpent, by him first made common and unhallowed ere our taste. Nor yet on him found deadly, he yet lives, as thou saidst, and gains to live, as man, higher degree of life. Inducement strong to us, as likely tasting to attain proportional assent, which cannot be but to be gods, or angels, demigods. Nor can I think that God, Creator wise, though threatening, will in earnest so destroy us his prime creatures, dignified so high, set over all his works, which in our fall for us created, needs with us must fail, dependent made. So God shall uncreate, be frustrate, do, undo, and labor lose, not well conceived of God, who, though his power creation could repeat, yet would be loath us to abolish, lest the adversary triumph and say, Fickle their state whom God most favors, who can please him long? Me first he ruined, now mankind, whom will he next? Matter of scorn, not to be given the foe. However, I with thee have fixed my lot, certain to undergo like doom. If death consort with thee, death is to me as life. So forcible within my heart I feel the bond of nature draw me to my own in thee, for what thou art is mine. Our state cannot be severed, we are one flesh. To lose thee were to lose myself. So Adam, and thus Eve to him replied, O glorious trial of exceeding love, illustrious evidence, example high, engaging me to emulate, but short of thy perfection, how shall I attain? Adam, from whose dear side I boast me sprung, and gladly of our union hear thee speak, one heart, one soul in both, whereof good proof this day affords, declaring thee resolved, rather than death or aught than death more dread shall separate us, linked in love so dear, to undergo with me one guilt, one crime, if any be, of tasting this fair fruit, whose virtue, for of good still good proceeds, direct or by occasion, hath presented this happy trial of thy love, which else so eminently never had been known. Were it I thought death menaced would ensue this my attempt, I would sustain alone the worst, and not persuade thee, rather die deserted than oblige thee with a fact pernicious to thy peace, chiefly assured remarkably so late of thy so true, so faithful love unequalled. But I feel far otherwise the event, not death, but life augmented, opened eyes, new hopes, new joys, tastes so divine, that what of sweet before hath touched my sense, Flat seems to this, and harsh. On my experience, Adam, freely taste, and fear of death deliver to the winds." So saying, she embraced him, and for joy tenderly wept, much won that he his love had so ennobled, as of choice to incur divine displeasure for her sake, or death. In recompense, for such compliance bad, such recompense best merits. From the bough she gave him of that fair enticing fruit with liberal hand. He scrupled not to eat against his better knowledge, not deceived, but fondly overcome with female charm. Earth trembled from her entrails, as again in pangs, and nature gave a second groan. Sky lowered, and muttering thunder, some sad drops wept at completing of the mortal sin original. While Adam took no thought, eating his fill, nor Eve to iterate her former trespass feared, the more to soothe him with her loved society, that now as with new wine intoxicated both they swim in mirth, and fancy that they feel divinity within them breeding wings wherewith to scorn the earth. But that false fruit far other operation first displayed, carnal desire inflaming. He on Eve began to cast lascivious eyes, she him as wantonly repaid. In lust they burn, till Adam thus 'gan Eve to dalliance move. "Eve, now I see thou art exact of taste, and elegant, of sapience no small part, since to each meaning savour we apply, and palate call judicious. I the praise yield thee, so well this day thou hast purveyed. Much pleasure we have lost while we abstained from this delightful fruit, nor known till now true relish, tasting. If such pleasure be in things to us forbidden, it might be wished for this one tree had been forbidden 10. But come, so well refreshed, now let us play, as meet is, after such delicious fare. For never did thy beauty, since the day I saw thee first and wedded thee, adorned with all perfections, so inflame my sense with ardour to enjoy thee, fairer now than ever, bounty of this virtuous tree." So said he, and forbore not glance or toy of amorous intent, well understood of Eve, whose eye darted contagious fire. Her hand he seized, and to a shady bank, thick overhead with verdant roof embowered, he led her, nothing loath. Flowers were the couch, pansies and violets and asphodel, and hyacinth, earth's freshest, softest lap. There they their fill of love and love's disport took largely, of their mutual guilt the seal, the solace of their sin, till dewy sleep oppressed them, wearied with their amorous play. Soon as the force of that fallacious fruit that with exhilarating vapour bland about their spirits had played, and inmost powers made was now exhaled, and grosser sleep, bred of unkindly fumes, with conscious dreams encumbered, now had left them, up they rose as from unrest, and each the other viewing, soon found their eyes how opened, and their minds how darkened. Innocence, that as a veil had shadowed them from knowing ill, was gone. Just confidence and native righteousness and honour from about them naked left to guilty shame. He covered, but his robe uncovered more. So rose the Danite strong, Herculean Samson from the harlot lap of Philistine Dalilah, and waked shorn of his strength. They destitute and bare of all their virtue. Silent and in face confounded, long they sat, as struck and mute, till Adam, though not less than Eve abashed, at length gave utterance to these words constrained. "O Eve, in evil hour thou didst give ear to that false worm, of whomsoever taught to counterfeit man's voice, true in our fall, false in our promised rising. Since our eyes opened we find indeed, and find we know both good and evil, good lost, and evil got. Bad fruit of knowledge, if this be to know, which leaves us naked thus, of honour void, of innocence, of faith, of purity, our wonted ornaments now soiled and stained, and in our faces evident the signs of foul concupiscence, whence evils store. Even shame the last of evils, of the first be sure then. How shall I behold the face henceforth of God or angel, erst with joy and rapture so oft beheld? Those heavenly shapes will dazzle now this earthly, with their blaze insufferably bright. O might I here in solitude live savage, in some glade obscured, where highest woods impenetrable to star or sunlight spread their umbrage broad and brown as evening. Cover me, ye pines, ye cedars, with innumerable boughs hide me, where I may never see them more. But let us now, as in bad plight, devise what best may for the present serve to hide the parts of each from other, that seem most to shame obnoxious and unseemliest seen, some tree whose broad smooth leaves, together sewed and girded on our loins, may cover round those middle parts, that this newcomer, shame, there sit not, and reproach us as unclean. So counselled he, and both together went into the thickest wood. There soon they chose the fig tree, not that kind for fruit renowned, but such as at this day to Indians known in Malabar or Deccan, spreads her arms branching so broad and long, that in the ground the bended twigs take root, and daughters grow about the mother tree, a pillared shade high overarched, and echoing walks between. There oft the Indian herdsman, shunning heat, shelters in cool, and tends his pasturing herds at loopholes cut through thickest shade. Those leaves they gathered, broad as Amazonian targe, and with what skill they had, together sewed to gird their waist, vain covering if to hide their guilt and dreaded shame. Oh, how unlike to that first naked glory! Such of late Columbus found the American, so girt with feathered cincture, naked else and wild, among the trees on isles and woody shores. Thus fenced, and as they thought, their shame in part covered, but not at rest or ease of mind, they sat them down to weep. Nor only tears rained at their eyes, but high winds worse within began to rise, high passions, anger, hate, mistrust, suspicion, discord, and shook sore their inward state of mind, calm region once and full of peace, now tossed and turbulent. For understanding ruled not, and the will heard not her lore, both in subjection now to sensual appetite, who from beneath usurping over sovereign reason claimed superior sway. From thus distempered breast, Adam, estranged in look and altered style, speech intermitted thus to Eve renewed. Would thou hadst hearkened to my words, and stayed with me as I besought thee, when that strange desire of wandering this unhappy morn, I know not whence, possessed thee. We had then remained still happy, not as now, despoiled of all our good, shamed, naked, miserable. Let none henceforth seek needless cause to approve the faith they owe. When earnestly they seek such proof, conclude, they then begin to fail. To whom, soon moved with touch of blame, thus Eve, What words have passed thy lips, Adam severe? Imputest thou that to my default, or will of wandering, as thou callest it, which who knows but might as ill have happened, thou being by, or to thyself perhaps? Hadst thou been there, or hear the attempt, thou couldst not have discerned fraud in the serpent, speaking as he spake. No ground of enmity between us known, why he should mean me ill, or seek to harm. Was I to have never parted from thy side? As good have grown there still a lifeless rib. Being as I am, why didst not thou, the head, command me absolutely not to go, going into such danger as thou saidst? Too facile then, thou didst not much gainsay, nay, didst permit, approve, and fair dismiss. Hadst thou been firm and fixed in thy dissent, neither had I transgressed, nor thou with me. To whom, then first incensed, Adam replied, Is this the love, is this the recompense of mine to thee, ingrateful Eve, expressed immutable when thou wert lost, not I, who might have lived and enjoyed immortal bliss, yet willingly chose rather death with thee, and am I now upbraided as the cause of thy transgressing? Not enough severe, it seems, in thy restraint. What could I more? I warned thee, I admonished thee, foretold the danger, and the lurking enemy that lay in wait. Beyond this had been force, and force upon free will hath here no place. But confidence then bore thee on, secure either to meet the danger, or to find matter of glorious trial. And perhaps I also erred in overmuch admiring what seemed in thee so perfect, that I thought no evil durst attempt thee. But I rue that error now, which is become my crime, and thou the accuser. Thus it shall befall him who to worth in women over-trusting lets her will rule. Restraint she will not brook, and left to herself, if evil thence ensue, she first his weak indulgence will accuse. Thus they in mutual accusation spent the fruitless hours, but neither self-condemning, and of their vain contest appeared no end. End of Book 8, Part 2.
Book 9, Part 1. The Argument. Man's transgression known, the guardian angels forsake paradise and return up to heaven to approve their vigilance, and are approved, God declaring that the entrance of Satan could not be by them prevented. He sends his Son to judge the transgressors, who descends and gives sentence accordingly, then in pity clothes them both, and reascends. Sin and death, sitting till then at the gates of hell, by wondrous sympathy feeling the success of Satan in this new world, and the sin by man there committed, resolve to sit no longer confined in hell, but to follow Satan, their sire, up to the place of man. To make the way easier from hell to this world, to and fro, they pave a broad highway or bridge over chaos, according to the track that Satan first made. Then, preparing for earth, they meet him, proud of his success, returning to hell. Their mutual gratulation. Satan arrives at Pandemonium, in full assembly relates with boasting his success against man. Instead of applause, is entertained with a general hiss by all his audience, transformed with himself also suddenly into serpents, according to his doom given in paradise. Then, deluded with a show of the forbidden tree springing up before them, they greedily reaching to take of the fruit, chew dust and bitter ashes. Meanwhile the heinous and despiteful act of Satan done in paradise, and how he and the serpent had perverted Eve, her husband, she, to taste the fatal fruit, was known in heaven. For what can scape the eye of God all-seeing, or deceive his heart, omniscient, who in all things, wise and just, hindered not Satan to attempt the mind of man, with strength entire and free will armed, complete to have discovered and repulsed whatever wiles of foe or seeming friend. For still they knew, and ought to have still remembered, the high injunction not to taste that fruit, whoever tempted, which they not obeying, incurred, what could they less? The penalty, and manifold in sin, deserved to fall. Up into heaven from paradise in haste th' angelic guards ascended, mute and sad, for man, for of his state by this they knew, much wondering how the subtle fiend had stolen entrance unseen. Soon as th' unwelcome news from earth arrived at heaven gate, displeased all were who heard, dim sadness did not spare that time celestial visages, yet mixed with pity, violated not their bliss. About the new arrived in multitudes th' ethereal people ran, to hear and know how all befell. They towards the throne supreme accountable made haste to make appear, with righteous plea, their utmost vigilance, and easily approved, when the Most High Eternal Father from his secret cloud, amidst in thunder, uttered thus his voice: Assembled angels, and ye powers returned from unsuccessful charge, be not dismayed, nor troubled at these tidings from earth, which your sincerest care could not prevent, foretold so lately what would come to pass, when first this tempter crossed the gulf from hell. I told ye then he should prevail and speed on his bad errand. Man should be seduced and flattered out of all, believing lies against his Maker. No decree of mine concurring to necessitate his fall, or touch with lightest moment of impulse his free will, to her own inclining left in even scale. But fallen he is, and now what rests, but that the mortal sentence pass on his transgression? Death denounced that day, which he presumes already vain and void, because not yet inflicted, as he feared, by some immediate stroke, but soon shall find forbearance no acquittance ere day end. Justice shall not return as bounty scorned. But whom send I to judge them? Whom but thee, Vice-Regent's son? To thee I have transferred all judgment, whether in heaven or earth or hell. Easy it may be seen that I intend mercy colleague with justice, sending thee, man's friend, his mediator, his design, both ransom and redeemer voluntary, and destined man himself to judge man fallen. So spake the Father, and unfolding bright towards the right hand his glory, on the Son blazed forth unclouded deity, he full resplendent, all his Father manifest expressed, and thus divinely answered mild. Father eternal, thine is to decree, mine both in heaven and earth to do thy will supreme, that thou in me, thy Son beloved, mayst ever rest well pleased. I go to judge on earth these thy transgressors, but thou knowest, whoever judged, the worst on me must light, when time shall be, for so I undertook before thee, and not repenting this obtain of right, that I may mitigate their doom on me derived. Yet I shall temper so justice with mercy, as may illustrate most them fully satisfied, and thee appease. Attendance none shall need, nor train, where none are to behold the judgment but the judged. Those two. The third, best absent, is condemned, convict by flight, and rebel to all law. Conviction to the serpent none belongs. Thus saying, from his radiant seat he rose, of high collateral glory, him thrones and powers, princedoms and dominations ministrant, accompanied to heaven gate, from whence Eden and all the coast in prospect lay. Down he descended straight, the speed of gods time counts not, though with the swiftest minutes winged. Now was the sun in western cadence low from noon, and gentle airs, due at their hour to fan the earth, now waked, and usher in the evening cool, when he from wrath more cool came, the mild judge and intercessor both, to sentence man. The voice of God they heard, now walking in the garden, by soft winds brought to their ears. While day declined, they heard, and from his presence hid themselves among the thickest trees, both man and wife, till God, approaching, thus to Adam called aloud, Where art thou, Adam? Wont with joy to meet my coming, seen far off. I miss thee here, not pleased, thus entertained with solitude, where obvious duty erewhile appeared unsought. Or come I less conspicuous, or what change absents thee, or what chance detains? Come forth. He came, and with him Eve, more loath, though first to offend, discountenanced both, and discomposed. Love was not in their looks, either to God or to each other, but apparent guilt, and shame, and perturbation, and despair, anger, and obstinacy, and hate, and guile, whence Adam, faltering long, thus answered brief, I heard thee in the garden, and of thy voice, afraid, being naked, hid myself. To whom the gracious judge without revile replied, My voice thou oft hast heard, and hast not feared, but still rejoiced. How is it now become so dreadful to thee, that thou art naked? Who hath told thee? Hast thou eaten of the tree, whereof I gave thee charge thou shouldst not eat? To whom thus Adam, sore beset, replied, O heaven! In evil strait this day I stand before my judge, either to undergo myself the total crime, or to accuse my other self, the partner of my life, whose failing, while her faith to me remains, I should conceal, and not expose to blame by my complaint. But strict necessity subdues me, and calamitous constraint, lest on my head both sin and punishment, however insupportable, be all devolved. Though should I hold my peace, yet thou wouldst easily detect what I conceal. This woman, who thou madest to be my help, and gavest me as thy perfect gift, so good, so fit, so acceptable, so divine, that from her hand I could suspect no ill, and what she did, whatever in itself her doing seemed to justify the deed, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat. To whom the sovereign presence thus replied, Was she thy God, that her thou didst obey before his voice? Or was she made thy guide, superior, or but equal, that to her thou didst resign thy manhood, and the place wherein God set thee above her, made of thee? And for thee, whose perfection far excelled hers in all real dignity, adorned she was indeed, and lovely to attract thy love, not thy subjection, and her gifts were such as under government well seemed unseemly to bear rule, which was thy part and person, hadst thou known thyself aright. So having said, he thus to Eve in few, Say, woman, what is this which thou hast done? To whom sad Eve, with shame nigh overwhelmed, confessing soon, yet not before her judge, bold or loquacious, thus abashed replied, The serpent me beguiled, and I did eat. Which when the Lord God heard, without delay, to judgment he proceeded on the accused serpent, though brute, unable to transfer the guilt on him who made him instrument of mischief, and polluted from the end of his creation, justly then accursed, as vitiated in nature, more to know concerned not man, since he no further knew, nor altered his offence, yet God at last to Satan first in sin his doom applied, though in mysterious terms, judged as then best, and on the serpent thus his curse let fall. Because thou hast done this, thou art accursed above all cattle, each beast of the field. Upon thy belly grovelling thou shalt go, and dust shalt eat all the days of thy life. Between thee and the woman I will put enmity, and between thine and her seed shall bruise thy head, thou bruise his heel. So spake this oracle, then verified, when Jesus, son of Mary, second Eve, saw Satan fall like lightning down from heaven, prince of the air. Then, rising from his grave, spoiled principalities and powers, triumphed in open show, and with ascension bright, captivity led captive through the air, the realm itself of Satan long usurped, whom he shall tread at last under our feet. Even he who now foretold his fatal bruise, and to the woman thus his sentence turned. Thy sorrow I will greatly multiply by thy conception. Children thou shalt bring in sorrow forth, and to thy husband's will thine shall submit. He over thee shall rule. On Adam last thus judgment he pronounced, Because thou hast hearkened to the voice of thy wife, and eaten of the tree concerning which I charged thee, saying, Thou shalt not eat thereof. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. Thou in sorrow shalt eat thereof all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles it shall bring thee forth unbid, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground. For thou out of the ground wast taken. Know thy birth, for dust thou art, and shalt to dust return. So judged he man, both judge and saviour sent, and instant stroke of death denounced that day, removed far off. Then pitying how they stood before him naked to the air, that now must suffer change, disdained not to begin thenceforth the form of servant to assume, as when he washed his servants' feet, so now as father of his family he clad their nakedness with skins of beasts, or slain, or as the snake with youthful coat repaid, and thought not much to clothe his enemies, nor he their outward only with the skins of beasts, but inward nakedness much more opprobrious, with his robe of righteousness arraying, covered from his father's sight. To him with swift ascent he up returned, into his blissful bosom reassumed, in glory as of old, to him appeased, all, though all knowing, what had passed with man recounted, mixing intercession sweet. Meanwhile, ere thus was sinned and judged on earth, within the gates of hell sat sin and death, in counterview within the gates, that now stood open wide, belching outrageous flame far into chaos, since the fiend passed through, sin opening, who thus now to death began. O son, why sit we here each other viewing idly, while Satan our great author thrives in other worlds, and happier seat provides for us, his offspring dear? It cannot be but that success attends him, if mishap ere this he had returned, with fury driven by his avenger, since no place like this can fit his punishment, or their revenge. Methinks I feel new strength within me rise, wings growing, and dominion given me large beyond this deep. Whatever draws me on, or sympathy, or some connatural force, powerful at greatest distance to unite with secret amity things of like kind by secretest conveyance, Thou, my shade, inseparable must with me along, for death from sin no power can separate. But lest the difficulty of passing back stay his return, perhaps over this gulf, impassable, impervious, let us try adventurous work, yet to thy power and mine not unagreeable, to found a path over this main from hell to that new world where Satan now prevails, a monument of merit high to all the infernal host, easing their passage hence, for intercourse or transmigration, as their lot shall lead. Nor can I miss the way, so strongly drawn by this new felt attraction and instinct. Whom thus the meagre shadow answered soon, Go, whither fate and inclination strong leads thee. I shall not lag behind, nor err the way, thou leading. Such a scent I draw of carnage, prey innumerable, and taste the savour of death from all things there that live. Nor shall I to the work thou enterprisest be wanting, but afford thee equal aid. So saying with delight, he snuffed the smell of mortal change on earth, as when a flock of ravenous fowl, though many a league remote against the day of battle, to a field where armies lie encamped come flying, lured with scent of living carcasses designed for death the following day in bloody fight. So scented the grim feature, and upturned his nostril wide into the murky air, sagacious of his quarry from so far. Then both from out hell gates into the waste wide anarchy of chaos damp and dark flew diverse, and with power, their power was great, hovering upon the waters. What they met, solid or slimy as in a raging sea tossed up and down, together crowded drove from each side, shoaling towards the mouth of hell, as when two polar winds blowing adverse upon the Cronian sea together drive mountains of ice that stop the imagined way beyond Petsora eastward to the rich Cathayan coast. The aggregated soil, death with his mace petrific, cold and dry, as with a trident smote, and fixed as firm as Delos floating once. The rest his look bound with Gorgonian rigour, not to move, and with asphaltic slime, broad as the gate, deep to the roots of hell the gathered beach they fastened, and the mole immense wrought on over the foaming deep high arched, a bridge of length prodigious, joining to the wall immovable of this now fenceless world, forfeit to death. From hence a passage broad, smooth, easy, inoffensive down to hell. So, if great things to small may be compared, Xerxes, the liberty of Greece to yoke from Susa, his Memnonian palace high, came to the sea, and over Hellespont, bridging his way, Europe with Asia joined, and scourged with many a stroke the indignant waves. Now had they brought the work by wondrous art pontifical, a ridge of pendant rock over the vexed abyss, following the track of Satan to the selfsame place where he first lighted from his wing, and landed safe from out of chaos to the outside bare of this round world. With pins of adamant and chains they made all fast, too fast they made, and durable. And now in little space the confines met of empyrean heaven and of this world, and on the left hand hell with long reach interposed. 3 several ways in sight, to each of these 3 places led, and now their way to earth they had descried, to paradise first tending, when behold, Satan in likeness of an angel bright, betwixt the centaur and the scorpion steering his zenith, while the sun in Aries rose. Disguised he came, but those his children dear, their parents soon discerned, though in disguise. He, after Eve seduced, unminded slunk into the wood fast by, and changing shape to observe the sequel, saw his guileful act by Eve, though all unweeting, seconded upon her husband, saw their shame that sought vain covertures. But when he saw descend the Son of God to judge them, terrified he fled, not hoping to escape, but shun the present, fearing guilty what his wrath might suddenly inflict. That past, returned by night, and listening where the hapless pair sat in their sad discourse and various plaint, thence gathered his own doom, which understood, not instant, but of future time. With joy and tidings fraught, to hell he now returned, and at the brink of chaos, near the foot of this new wondrous pontifice, unhoped, met who to meet him came, his offspring dear. Great joy was at their meeting, and at sight of that stupendous bridge his joy increased. Long he admiring stood, till Sin, his fair enchanting daughter, thus the silence broke. O parent, these are thy magnific deeds, thy trophies, which thou view'st as not thine own. Thou art their author and prime architect, for I no sooner in my heart divined, my heart, which by a secret harmony still moves with thine, joined in connection sweet, that thou on earth hadst prospered, which thy looks now also evidence. But straight I felt, though distant from thee, worlds between, yet felt that I must after thee with this thy son. Such fatal consequence unites us three. Hell could no longer hold us in her bounds, nor this unvoyageable gulf obscure detain from following thy illustrious track. Thou hast achieved our liberty, confined within hell gates till now, thou us empowered to fortify thus far, and overlay with this portentous bridge the dark abyss. Thine now is all this world, thy virtue hath won what thy hands builded not, thy wisdom gained with odds what war hath lost, and fully avenged our foil in heaven. Here thou shalt monarch reign, there didst not. There let him still victor sway, as battle hath adjudged, from this new world retiring, by his own doom alienated, and henceforth monarchy with thee divide of all things, parted by th' imperial bounds, his quadrature from thy orbicular world, or try thee now, more dangerous to his throne. Whom thus the Prince of Darkness answered glad, Fair daughter, and thou son and grandchild both, high proof ye now have given to be the race of Satan, for I glory in the name, antagonist of heaven's almighty King, amply have merited of me, of all th' infernal empire, that so near heaven's door, triumphal with triumphal act, have met mine with this glorious work, and made one realm, hell, and this world, one realm, one continent of easy thoroughfare. Therefore, while I descend through darkness on your road with ease to my associate powers, them to acquaint with these successes, and with them rejoice, you too this way, among those numerous orbs, all yours, right down to paradise descend. There dwell and reign in bliss, thence on the earth dominion exercise, and in the air chiefly on man, sole lord of all declared. Him first make sure your thrall, and lastly kill. My substitutes I send ye, and create plenipotent on earth, of matchless might, issuing from me. On your joint vigour now my hold of this new kingdom all depends, through sin to death exposed by my exploit. If your joint power prevail, the fares of hell no detriment need fear. Go and be strong. So saying he dismissed them. They with speed their course through thickest constellations held, spreading their bane. The blasted stars looked wan, and planets, planet struck, real eclipse then suffered. T'other way Satan went down, the causeway to hell gate. On either side disparted chaos, overbuilt, exclaimed, and with rebounding surge the bars assailed that scorned his indignation. Through the gate wide open and unguarded Satan passed, and with all about found desolate, for those appointed to sit there had left their charge, flown to the upper world. The rest were all far to the inland retired, about the walls of Pandemonium, city and proud seat of Lucifer, so by allusion called, of that bright star to Satan paragoned. There kept their watch the legions, while the grand in council sat, solicitous what chance might intercept their emperor sent. So he departing gave command, and they observed. As when the Tartar from his Russian foe by Astrakhan over the snowy plains retires, or Bactrian Sophie from the horns of Turkish Crescent leaves all waste beyond the realm of Aladul in his retreat to Tauris or Casbin. So these, the late heaven-banished host, left desert, utmost hell, many a dark league, reduced in careful watch round their metropolis. And now expecting each hour their great adventurer from the search of foreign worlds, he through the midst unmarked, in show plebeian angel militant of lowest order, passed, and from the door of that Plutonian hall invisible ascended his high throne, which under state of richest texture spread, at th' upper end, was placed in regal lustre. Down a while he sat, and round about him saw, unseen. At last, as from a cloud, his fulgent head and shape star bright appeared, or brighter, clad with what permissive glory since his fall was left him, or false glitter. All amazed at that so sudden blaze, the Stygian throng bent their aspect, and whom they wished beheld. Their mighty chief returned. Loud was the claim. Forth rushed in haste the great consulting peers, raised from their dark divan, and with like joy congratulant approached him, who with hand silence, and with these words attention won. Thrones, dominations, princedoms, virtues, powers, for in possession such, not only of right I call ye, and declare ye now, returned successful beyond hope, to lead ye forth triumphant out of this infernal pit, abominable, accursed, the house of woe and dungeon of our tyrant. Now possess as lords a spacious world, to our native heaven little inferior, by my adventure hard, with peril great, achieved. Long were to tell what I have done, what suffered, with what pain voyaged unreal, vast, unbounded deep, of horrible confusion, over which by sin and death a broad way now is paved, to expedite your glorious march. But I toiled out my uncouth passage, forced to ride th' untractable abyss, plunged in the womb of unoriginal night and chaos wild, that jealous of their secrets fiercely opposed my journey strange, with clamorous uproar, protesting fate supreme. Thence how I found the new created world, which fame in heaven long had foretold, a fabric wonderful, of absolute perfection, therein man, placed in a paradise, by our exile made happy. Him by fraud I have seduced from his Creator, and the more to increase your wonder, with an apple. He thereat offended, worth your laughter, hath given up both his beloved man, and all his world to sin and death a prey, and so to us, without our hazard, labour, or alarm, to range in, and to dwell, and over man to rule as over all he should have ruled. True is, me also he hath judged, or rather me not, but the brute serpent, in whose shape man I have deceived. That which to me belongs is enmity, which he will put between me and mankind. I am to bruise his heel. His seed, when is not set, shall bruise my head. A world who would not purchase with a bruise, or much more grievous pain. Ye have the count of my performance. What remains, ye gods, but up and enter now into full bliss? So having said, a while he stood, expecting their universal shout and high applause to fill his ear, when contrary he hears, on all sides from innumerable tongues, a dismal universal hiss, the sound of public scorn. He wondered, but not long had leisure, wondering at himself now more. His visage drawn he felt to sharpen spare, his arms clung to his ribs, his legs entwining each other, till supplanted down he fell, a monstrous serpent on his belly prone. Reluctant, but in vain, a greater power now ruled him, punished in the shape he sinned, according to his doom. He would have spoke, but hiss for hiss returned, with forked tongue to forked tongue, for now were all transformed alike to serpents, all as accessories to his bold riot. Dreadful was the din of hissing through the hall, thick swarming now with complicated monsters, head and tail, scorpion and asp and amphispina dire, Cerastes horned, Hydrus and Ilops drear, and Dipsus, not so thick swarmed once the soil bedropped with blood of Gorgon, or the isle Ophiusa, but still greatest he the midst, now dragon grown, larger than whom the sun engendered in the Pythian vale on slime, huge Python, and his power no less he seemed above the rest still to retain. They all him followed, issuing forth to th' open field, where all yet left of that revolted rout, heaven fallen, in station stood or just array, sublime with expectation, when to see in triumph issuing forth their glorious chief. They saw but other sight instead, a crowd of ugly serpents. Horror on them fell, and horrid sympathy. For what they saw, they felt themselves now changing. Down their arms, down fell both spear and shield, down they as fast, and the dire hiss renewed, and the dire form, caught by contagion, like in punishment as in their crime. Thus was the applause they meant, turned to exploding hiss, triumph to shame, cast on themselves from their own mouths. There stood a grove hard by, sprung up with this their change, his will who reigns above to aggravate their penance, laden with fair fruit, like that which grew in paradise, the bait of Eve, used by the tempter. On that prospect strange their earnest eyes they fixed, imagining for one forbidden tree a multitude now risen, to work them further woe or shame. Yet parched with scalding thirst and hunger fierce, though to delude them sent, could not abstain, but on they rolled in heaps, and up the trees, climbing, sat thicker than the snaky locks that curled Megaera. Greedily they plucked the fruitage fair to sight, like that which grew near that bituminous lake where Sodom flamed. This more delusive, not the touch but taste deceived, they fondly thinking to allay their appetite with gust, instead of fruit chewed bitter ashes, which the fended taste with spattering noise rejected. Oft they essayed, hunger and thirst constraining, drugged as oft, with hatefullest disrelish writhed their jaws, with soot and cinders filled. So oft they fell into the same illusion, not as man whom they triumphed once lapsed. Thus were they plagued and worn with famine. Long and ceaseless hiss, till their lost shape permitted they resumed, yearly enjoined, some say, to undergo this annual humbling certain numbered days, to dash their pride and joy for man seduced. However, some tradition they dispersed among the heathen of their purchase got, and fabled how the serpent, whom they called Ophion, with Eurynome the wide encroaching Eve perhaps, had first the rule of high Olympus, thence by Saturn driven, and Ops, ere yet Dictaean Jove was born. End of Part 1 of Book 9. Book 9, Part 2. The Argument. The proceedings of sin and death. God foretells the final victory of his Son over them, and the renewing of all things, but for the present commands his angels to make several alterations in the heavens and elements. Adam, more and more perceiving his fallen condition, heavily bewails, rejects the condolement of Eve. She persists, and at length appeases him. Then, to evade the curse likely to fall on their offspring, proposes to Adam violent ways, which he approves not, but conceiving better hope, puts her in mind of the late promise made them, that her seed should be revenged on the serpent, and exhorts her with him to seek peace of the offended deity by repentance and supplication. Meanwhile in paradise the hellish pair too soon arrived. Sin, there in power before, once actual, now in body, and to dwell habitual habitant. Behind her Death, close following, pace for pace, not mounted yet on his pale horse, to whom Sin thus began: Second of Satan sprung, all-conquering Death, what think'st thou of our empire now, though earned with travail difficult? Not better far than still at hell's dark threshold to have sat watch, unnamed, undreaded, and thyself half starved? Whom thus the sin-born monster answered soon: To me, who with eternal famine pine, alike is hell, or paradise, or heaven, there best, where most with ravin I may meet, which here, though plenteous, all too little seems to stuff this maw, this vast unhidebound corpse. To whom th' incestuous mother thus replied: Thou therefore on these herbs and fruits and flowers feed first, on each beast next, and fish and fowl, no homely morsels, and whatever thing the scythe of time mows down, devour unspared, till I in man residing through the race, his thoughts, his looks, words, actions, all infect, and season him thy last and sweetest prey. This said, they both betook them several ways, both to destroy, or unimmortal make, all kinds, and for destruction to mature sooner or later, which th' Almighty seeing from his transcendent seat, the saints among, to those bright orders uttered thus his voice: See with what heat these dogs of hell advance to waste and havoc yonder world, which I, so fair and good, created, and had still kept in that state, had not the folly of man let in these wasteful furies, who impute folly to me. So doth the prince of hell and his adherents, that with so much ease I suffer them to enter and possess a place so heavenly, and conniving seem to gratify my scornful enemies, that laugh as if transported with some fit of passion I to them had quitted all, at random yielded up to their misrule, and know not that I called and drew them thither, my hell hounds, to lick up the draught and filth which man's polluting sin with taint hath shed on what was pure, till crammed and gorged, nigh burst with sucked and glutted offal, at one sling of thy victorious arm, well-pleasing Son, both sin and death and yawning grave at last through chaos hurled, obstruct the mouth of hell for ever, and seal up his ravenous jaws. Then heaven and earth renewed shall be made pure to sanctity that shall receive no stain. Till then the curse pronounced on both precedes. He ended, and the heavenly audience loud sung Hallelujah, as the sound of seas through multitude that sung. Just are thy ways, righteous are thy decrees on all thy works. Who can extenuate thee, next to the Son, destined restorer of mankind, by whom new heaven and earth shall to the ages rise, or down from heaven descend? Such was their song, while the Creator, calling forth by name his mighty angels, gave them several charge, as sorted best with present things. The sun had first his precept so to move, so shine, as might affect the earth with cold and heat, scarce tolerable, and from the north to call decrepit winter, from the south to bring solstitial summer's heat. To the blank moon her office they prescribed, to th' other five their planetary motions and aspects, in sextile, square, and trine, and opposite, of noxious efficacy, and when to join in synod unbenign, and taught the fixed their influence malignant when to shower, which of them rising with the sun or falling should prove tempestuous. To the winds they set their corners, when with blusters to confound sea, air, and shore, the thunder when to roll with terror through the darker aerial hall. Some say he bid his angels turn askance the poles of earth twice 10 degrees and more from the sun's axle. They with labour pushed oblique the centric globe. Some say the sun was bid turn reins from the equinoctial road, like distant breadth to Taurus with the 7 Atlantic sisters, and the Spartan twins up to the tropic crab, thence down amain by Leo and the Virgin and the Scales, as deep as Capricorn, to bring in change of seasons to each clime. Else had the spring perpetual smiled on earth with vernant flowers, equal in days and nights, except to those beyond the polar circles. To them day had unbenighted shone, while the low sun, to recompense his distance, in their sight had rounded still the horizon, and not known of east or west, which had forbid the snow from cold Estoti land, and south as far beneath Magellan. At that tasted fruit the sun, as from Thyestean banquet, turned his course intended. Else how had the world, inhabited though sinless more than now, avoided pinching cold and scorching heat? These changes in the heavens, though slow, produced like change on sea and land, sidereal blast, vapour and mist, and exhalation hot, corrupt and pestilent, now from the north of Norumbega and the Samoyed shore, bursting their brazen dungeon, armed with ice and snow and hail and stormy gust and flaw, Boreas and Caecius and Argestes loud, and Thrascius rend the woods and seas upturn, with adverse blast upturns them from the south, Notus and Afer, black with thunderous clouds from Ceralonia. Thwart of these, as fierce, forth rush the Levant and the Ponent winds, Eurus and Zephyr with their lateral noise, Sirocco and Libecco. Thus began outrage from liveless things, but discord first, daughter of sin, among the irrational, death introduced through fierce antipathy. Beast now with beast gan war, and fowl with fowl, and fish with fish, to graze the herb, all leaving, devoured each other, nor stood much in awe of man, but fled him, or with countenance grim glared on him passing. These were from without the growing miseries, which Adam saw already in part, though hid in gloomiest shade, to sorrow abandoned, but worse felt within, and in a troubled sea of passion tossed, thus to disburden sought with sad complaint. O miserable of happy! Is this the end of this new glorious world, and me so late, the glory of that glory, who now become accursed of blessed? Hide me from the face of God, whom to behold was then my height of happiness. Yet well if here would end the misery, I deserved it, and would bear my own deservings, but this will not serve. All that I eat or drink or shall beget is propagated curse. O voice once heard delightfully, increase and multiply, now death to hear, for what can I increase or multiply but curses on my head? Who of all ages to succeed, but feeling the evil on him brought by me, will curse my head? Ill fare our ancestor impure, for this we may thank Adam, but his thanks shall be the execration. So besides mine own that bide upon me, all from me shall with a fierce reflux on me redound, on me as on their natural centre light, heavy though in their place. O fleeting joys of paradise, dear bought with lasting woes! Did I request thee, Maker, from my clay to mould me man? Did I solicit thee from darkness to promote me, or here place in this delicious garden? As my will concurred not to my being, it were but right and equal to reduce me to my dust, desirous to resign and render back all I received, unable to perform thy terms too hard, by which I was to hold the good I sought not. To the loss of that sufficient penalty, why hast thou added the sense of endless woes? Inexplicable thy justice seems, yet to say truth, too late I thus contest. Then should have been refused those terms whatever, when they were proposed. Thou didst accept them. Wilt thou enjoy the good, then cavil the conditions? And though God made thee without thy leave, what if thy son prove disobedient, and reproved retort, Wherefore didst thou beget me? I sought it not. Wouldst thou admit for his contempt of thee that proud excuse? Yet him not thy election, but natural necessity begot. God made thee of choice his own, and of his own to serve him. Thy reward was of his grace, thy punishment then justly is at his will. Be it so, for I submit. His doom is fair, that dust I am, and shall to dust return. O welcome hour whenever! Why delays his hand to execute what his decree fixed on this day? Why do I overlive? Why am I mocked with death, and lengthened out to deathless pain? How gladly would I meet mortality my sentence, and be earth insensible! How glad would lay me down as in my mother's lap! There I should rest and sleep secure, his dreadful voice no more with thunder in my ears. No fear of worse to me and to my offspring would torment me with cruel expectation. Yet one doubt pursues me still, lest all I cannot die, lest that pure breath of life, the spirit of man, which God inspired, cannot together perish with this corporeal clod. Then in the grave, or in some other dismal place, who knows but I shall die a living death? O thought horrid, if true! Yet why? It was but breath of life that sinned. What dies but what had life and sin? The body properly hath neither. All of me then shall die. Let this appease the doubt, since humane reach no further knows. For though the Lord of all be infinite, is his wrath also? Be it. Man is not so, but mortal doomed. How can he exercise wrath without end on man whom death must end? Can he make deathless death? That were to make strange contradiction, which to God himself impossible is held, as argument of weakness, not of power. Will he draw out for anger's sake finite to infinite in punished man, to satisfy his rigour, satisfied never? That were to extend his sentence beyond dust and nature's law, by which all causes else, according still to the reception of their matter act, not to the extent of their own sphere. But say that death be not one stroke, as I supposed, bereaving sense, but endless misery from this day onward, which I feel begun both in me and without me, and so last to perpetuity. Ay me, that fear comes thundering back with dreadful revolution on my defenceless head. Both death and I am found eternal, and incorporate both. Nor I on my part single, in me all posterity stands cursed. Fair patrimony that I must lead, ye sons! Oh, were I able to waste it all myself and leave ye none! So disinherited, how would ye bless me now your curse! Ah, why should all mankind for one man's fault thus guiltless be condemned, if guiltless? But from me what can proceed, but all corrupt, both mind and will depraved, not to do only, but to will the same with me? How can they acquitted stand in sight of God? Him after all disputes forced I absolve. All my evasions vain, and reasonings, though through mazes, leads me still but to my own conviction, first and last on me only, as the source and spring of all corruption, all the blame light's due. So might the wrath, fond wish, couldst thou support that burden heavier than the earth to bear, than all the world much heavier, though divided with that bad woman. Thus what thou desirest and what thou fearest alike destroys all hope of refuge, and concludes thee miserable beyond all past example and future, to Satan only like, both crime and doom. O conscience, into what abyss of fears and horrors hast thou driven me, out of which I find no way, but deep to deeper plunged! Thus Adam to himself lamented loud through the still night, not now as ere man fell, wholesome and cool and mild, but with black air accompanied with damps and dreadful gloom, which to his evil conscience represented all things with double terror. On the ground outstretched he lay, on the cold ground, and oft cursed his creation, death as oft accused of tardy execution, since denounced the day of his offence. Why comes not death, said he, with one thrice acceptable stroke to end me? Shall truth fail to keep her word, justice divine not hasten to be just? But death comes not at call, justice divine mends not her slowest pace for prayers or cries. O woods, O fountains, hillocks, dales, and bowers, with other echo late I taught your shades to answer, and resound far other song. Whom thus afflicted, when sad Eve beheld, desolate where she sat, approaching nigh, soft words to his fierce passion she essayed, but her with stern regard he thus repelled: Out of my sight, thou serpent! That name best befits thee with him leagued, thyself as false and hateful. Nothing wants but that thy shape like his, and colour serpentine, may show thy inward fraud, to warn all creatures from thee henceforth, lest that too heavenly form, pretended to hellish falsehood, snare them. But for thee I had persisted happy, had not thy pride and wandering vanity, when least was safe, rejected my forewarning, and disdained not to be trusted, longing to be seen, though by the devil himself, him overweening to overreach. But with the serpent meeting, fooled and beguiled, by him thou, I by thee, to trust thee from my side imagined wise, constant, mature, proof against all assaults, and understood not all was but a show rather than solid virtue, all but a rib, crooked by nature, bent as now appears, more to the part sinister from me drawn, well if thrown out as supernumerary, to my just number found. O why did God, creator wise, that peopled highest heaven, with spirits masculine, create at last this novelty on earth, this fair defect of nature, and not fill the world at once with men as angels without feminine? Or find some other way to generate mankind? This mischief had not then befallen, and more that shall befall, innumerable disturbances on earth, through female snares and strait conjunction with this sex. For either he never shall find out fit mate, but such as some misfortune brings him, or mistake, or whom he wishes most shall seldom gain through her perverseness, but shall see her gained by a far worse, or if she love, withheld by parents, or his happiest choice too late shall meet, already linked and wedlock bound to a fell adversary, his hate or shame, which infinite calamity shall cause to human life and household peace confound. He added not, and from her turned, but Eve, not so repulsed, with tears that ceased not flowing, and tresses all disordered, at his feet fell humble, and embracing them besought his peace, and thus proceeded in her plaint: "Forsake me not thus, Adam. Witness heaven what love sincere and reverence in my heart I bear thee, and unwitting have offended, unhappily deceived. Thy suppliant I beg, and clasp thy knees. Bereave me not whereon I live, thy gentle looks, thy aid, thy counsel in this uttermost distress. My only strength and stay, forlorn of thee, whither shall I betake me, where subsist? While yet we live, scarce one short hour perhaps, between us two, let there be peace, both joining as joined in injuries, one enmity against a foe by doom express assigned us, that cruel serpent. On me exercise not thy hatred for this misery befallen, on me already lost, me than thyself more miserable. Both have sinned, but thou against God only, I against God and thee, and to the place of judgment will return, there with my cries importune heaven, that all the sentence from thy head removed may light on me, sole cause to thee of all this woe, me only, just object of all his ire." She ended weeping, and her lowly plight immovable, till peace, obtained from fault, acknowledged and deplored, in Adam wrought commiseration. Soon his heart relented towards her, his life so late and sole delight, now at his feet submissive in distress, creature so fair his reconcilement seeking, his counsel whom she had displeased, his aid as one disarmed, his anger all he lost, and thus with peaceful words upraised her soon. Unwary and too desirous, as before so now, of what thou know'st not, who desir'st the punishment all on thyself, alas, bear thine own first, ill able to sustain his full wrath, whose thou feel'st as yet least part, and my displeasure bear'st so ill. If prayers could alter high decrees, I to that place would speed before thee, and be louder heard, that on my head all might be visited, thy frailty and infirmer sex forgiven, to me committed and by me exposed. But rise, let us no more contend or blame each other, blamed enough elsewhere, but strive in offices of love, how we may lighten each other's burden in our share of woe. Since this day's death denounced, if aught I see, will prove no sudden, but a slow paced evil, a long day's dying, to augment our pain, and to our seed, oh hapless seed, derived. To whom thus Eve, recovering heart, replied: "Adam, by sad experiment I know How little weight my words with thee can find, Found so erroneous; thence by just event Found so unfortunate. Nevertheless, restored by thee, vile as I am, to place of new acceptance, hopeful to regain thy love, the sole contentment of my heart, living or dying from thee, I will not hide what thoughts in my unquiet breast are risen, tending to some relief of our extremes, or end, though sharp and sad, yet tolerable, as in our evils, and of easier choice, if care of our descent perplex us most, which must be borne to certain woe, devoured by death at last, and miserable it is to be to others cause of misery, our own begotten, and of our loins to bring into this cursed world a woeful race, that after wretched life must be at last food for so foul a monster. In thy power it lies, yet ere conception, to prevent the race unblessed, to being yet unbegot. Childless thou art, childless remain, so death shall be deceived his glut, and with us two be forced to satisfy his ravenous maw. But if thou judge it hard and difficult, conversing, looking, loving, to abstain from love's due rites, nuptial embraces sweet, and with desire to languish without hope before the present object languishing, with like desire, which would be misery and torment less than none of what we dread, then both ourselves and seed at once to free from what we fear for both, let us make short, let us seek death, or he not found, supply with our own hands his office on ourselves. Why stand we longer shivering under fears that show no end but death, and have the power of many ways to die, the shortest choosing, destruction with destruction to destroy? She ended here, or vehement despair broke off the rest. So much of death her thoughts had entertained as dyed her cheeks with pale. But Adam with such counsel nothing swayed, to better hopes his more attentive mind labouring had raised, and thus to Eve replied: Eve, thy contempt of life and pleasure seems to argue in thee something more sublime and excellent than what thy mind condemns. But self-destruction therefore sought refutes that excellence thought in thee, and implies not thy contempt, but anguish and regret for loss of life and pleasure overloved. Or if thou covet death as utmost end of misery, so thinking to evade the penalty pronounced, doubt not but God hath wiselier armed his vengeful ire than so to be forestalled. Much more I fear lest death, so snatched, will not exempt us from the pain we are by doom to pay. Rather, such acts of contumacy will provoke the highest to make death in us live. Then let us seek some safer resolution, which methinks I have in view, calling to mind with heed part of our sentence, that thy seed shall bruise the serpent's head. Piteous amends, unless be meant, whom I conjecture, our grand foe Satan, who in the serpent hath contrived against us this deceit. To crush his head would be revenge indeed, which will be lost by death brought on ourselves, or childless days resolved, as thou proposest. So our foe shall 'scape his punishment ordained, and we instead shall double ours upon our heads. No more be mentioned then of violence against ourselves and wilful barrenness, that cuts us off from hope, and savours only rancour and pride, impatience and despite, reluctance against God and his just yoke laid on our necks. Remember with what mild and gracious temper he both heard and judged, without wrath or reviling. We expected immediate dissolution, which we thought was meant by death that day, when lo, to thee pains only in childbearing were foretold, and bringing forth, soon recompensed with joy, fruit of thy womb. On me the curse aslope glanced on the ground, with labour I must earn my bread. What harm? Idleness had been worse. My labour will sustain me, and lest cold or heat should injure us, his timely care hath unbesought provided, and his hands clothed us unworthy, pitying while he judged. How much more, if we pray him, will his ear be open, and his heart to pity incline, and teach us further by what means to shun the inclement seasons, rain, ice, hail, and snow, which now the sky with various face begins to show us in this mountain, while the winds blow moist and keen, shattering the graceful locks of these fair spreading trees, which bids us seek some better shroud, some better warmth to cherish our limbs benumbed, ere this diurnal star leave cold the night. How we his gathered beams reflected may with matter sear foment, or by collision of two bodies grind the air attrite to fire, as late the clouds justling, or pushed with winds, rude in their shock, tine the slant lightning, whose thwart flame driven down kindles the gummy bark of fir or pine, and sends a comfortable heat from far, which might supply the sun. Such fire to use, and what may else be remedy or cure to evils which our own misdeeds have wrought, he will instruct us, praying and of grace beseeching him, so as we need not fear to pass commodiously this life, sustained by him with many comforts, till we end in dust, our final rest and native home. What better can we do than, to the place repairing where he judged us, prostrate fall before him reverent, And there confess humbly our faults, and pardon beg, with tears watering the ground, and with our sighs the air frequenting, sent from hearts contrite, in sign of sorrow unfeigned and humiliation meek. Undoubtedly he will relent and turn from his displeasure, in whose look serene, when angry most he seemed and most severe, what else but favour, grace, and mercy shone. So spake our father penitent, nor Eve felt less remorse. They forthwith to the place repairing, where he judged them, prostrate fell before him reverent, and both confessed humbly their faults, and pardon begged, with tears watering the ground, and with their sighs the air frequenting, sent from hearts contrite, in sign of sorrow unfeigned and humiliation meek. End of Part 2 of Book 9 of Paradise Lost by John Milton.